We've recently reorganized, and Nat Irvin has become our assistant dean for, I still need to read it, it's Thought Leadership and Civic Engagement. And we are so blessed to have Nat leading that effort. As I came in here today, at least 4 or 5 people have told me what a great guy, what great energy, what great creativity, what an important activity for the College of Business. And I believe that wholeheartedly. This is the inaugural conversation put on, but we take our mission of civic engagement and thought leadership seriously. And we're bringing important thoughts into the community. We're engaging with the community. I grew up at the University of New Hampshire, a place that took its role in community and economic development seriously. It was a public university that aspired to be great. My father was the football coach, then the athletic director, then the vice president for student affairs. And he cared very much about what that university did for the people around it. I spent 30 years in between at a place that didn't take its public service mission very seriously, and I am so encouraged to be back at an institution, in fact, at the singular institution that takes that role seriously, engages in civic engagement seriously, with resources, and with people like Nat Irvin. So I'm so pleased to be at the University of Louisville where we do things like this, and the inaugural conversation is emblematic of those important activities. I want to take a minute to recognize a few people. A couple of people are at my table. Mary Moss Greenbaum is Executive Director of the Kentucky Authors Forum, and Melissa Bernstrom is the Associate Producer of the authors, and we really appreciate our partnership. We also are particularly thankful today. I'm always thankful for Sean and Ann O'Leary, especially Sean. He was on the search committee that chose me. He asked me not. Why did you ask me not to mention that? But Sean is an extraordinary leader in our community, and we appreciate Sean and Ann O'Leary's support for this event in particular today. And Kent Euler in Greater Louisville Incorporated is at an adjacent table. Kent has become a great friend of mine. I tell people the story. One day I mentioned that I hadn't met someone in the community. Kent immediately said, I'm going to come get you and we're going to go meet him. And I should have mentioned, excuse me, I should have reminded Kent of the speed limits on campus. But a few minutes later, here came Kent in his red BMW flying around the corner to pick me up and take me to introduce me to somebody that the College of Business needed to connect to. So I'm very appreciative both for Sean and Kent's support for this event and their support for me. I also want to take a minute to thank the people that run this facility. This is a great asset on campus, and we should thank the University Club, the chef and the staff, who are always so wonderful in putting on events and in greeting people like me who are new here as if they're long-standing members of an important community. We appreciate that work that the University Club does for us. With that, I am going to turn it over to Nat. I started my compliments to him a few minutes ago, but I need to, as I introduce Nat Irvin, remind you that we are blessed to have this type of energy, this kind of intellect in our community putting on events like this. Nat?
Thank you very much, Dean.
You have your own microphone.
I do. Thank you. And good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for joining us for this inaugural conversation. We are all excited about the 2 guests that we have today joining us. I'm especially glad that I'm joined with my colleague, Senator Gerald Neal, who I know many of you know is the longest serving member of our General Assembly, state senator since 1990, longest African American serving in the General Assembly. Gerald and I were having breakfast a few days ago when I mentioned that Malcolm Nance was going to be in town, and of course his eyes lit up, and we conspired immediately to talk with Melissa and Mary Moss about the possibility of having him, along with his colleague tonight who will be interviewing Malcolm at the Authors Forum, Ned Price. Now, both of these gentlemen have extraordinary backgrounds in counterintelligence, information technology, or the notion of understanding this whole field of counterintelligence and surveillance. And here's our challenge. We have a number of students in our audience, and obviously we're on campus, and one of the reasons we wanted to bring this forum to campus is because we wanted the students to have an opportunity to ask questions. Doesn't mean that the adults in the audience can't ask questions. I as well, but we really want the students to be able to do this. So we're going to have the challenge of Gerald and I are going to engage these gentlemen in a question and answer for about 20 minutes or so. And then we're going to turn it over to the audience. And so, of course, as I just said, it doesn't mean that the adults and the boomers can't ask questions, but we're going to give a preference to some of our students in the audience. Now, just by way of background, and I know that you have already read their backgrounds, but both of them have extraordinary careers of providing service to this great country of ours. Both of them having worked, as I said, one for the Navy, as a naval officer, counterintelligence, and this extraordinary background of Malcolm Nance, which, you know, it's impossible to kind of capture it in just a few words. But if you've seen him on MSNBC or any of the places on television, you know that he has a passion for this country. His family has served this country since after the Civil War. Nances have been serving in the service of our country in the military. Ned Price worked for the CIA from 2002, I guess? 2006 to 2017. He'll talk about that in a few minutes about why he decided to step down. But here's what brings us here today. This book, The Plot to Hack America. Now, if you ask the question about 9/11, where were you on 9/11? Everybody knows where they were on 9/11. You can tell a story. But if you ask the question which was raised by Malcolm Nance July 2017, Malcolm Nance raises this question and says, listen, everybody, you're getting this wrong. We are not being hacked by WikiLeaks. This is serious. Our nation is being attacked. It is being attacked with cyber warfare. This is serious. Finally, somebody decided to listen. Wait a minute. This is an equivalent of that kind of attack. So the question would be, the plot to hack America. Malcolm in this book is not talking about the physical attack of America. He's talking about we have been hacked. The American electorate's mind has been hacked, which is a different kind of a thing. But now we're in this post-hack, and we're having difficulty with reconciling what has happened to the country. That's the basis for our discussion today, which I'll ask for both of our guests to weigh in. And so, Malcolm, why don't we start with that? You talk about there being no coincidences. Both of you talk about the fact that most people look at information, the journalists look at information differently than you all. Right. How did you see it? Help us understand better where we are now, and how should we be going forward?
Okay, I'll put it briefly. When I wrote Plot to Hack America, I started on that date, July 25th, 2016. And about 4 months before, I was writing another book called Hacking ISIS. And in Hacking ISIS, we had been tracking all of the attempted operations ISIS had and trying to spread their propaganda and break into computer networks. And we found that there were 2 incidents that occurred in 2014 and 2015 that were carried out. It looked like it was ISIS. It wasn't. It was Russian intelligence pretending to be ISIS. And they were using a very sophisticated suite of malware called, which we all now know as Fancy Bear and Cozy Bear. But at the time, they had hacked into French television in Paris and were trying to steal all of the emails from TV5 in France. And you sit and think, why would Russian intelligence want to do that? Well, usually when they want to do that, it's for propaganda and blackmail purposes. Then they carried out another attack against Germany's parliament, the equivalent to our Congress, the Bundestag, also pretending to be ISIS, leaving ISIS banners around and things like that. So I had already had a little background on what was going on with regards to the Russians. So when it came out in March of 2016 that the Democratic National Committee had been hacked, and then information started to get leaked in April and June of 2016, it started becoming very apparent to me that this was not a small-scale operation. And then, of course, the Mandiant, the cybersecurity company, and CrowdStrike had taken a look at this, and they said, hey, this is the exact same organization. This is Russian military intelligence using a cyber warfare tool called Cozy Bear, and Russian clandestine service, the SVR and the FSB, using another malware suite called Cozy Bear. And I said, whoa, this is exactly what they've been doing for years. So why would these two malware groups, they aren't real physical people, they're tools that are used to infiltrate things. Why are they in the Democratic National Committee's headquarters, servers? And one answer came up very simply. They were carrying out Watergate. Again. Only this time, it's not 6 guys with wiretaps and, fake keys trying to break into the place and getting caught by a security guard. They sat in the DNC servers for over a year, and they vacuumed out everything, right? Credit cards, chats, emails, everything. And there's only one reason that the Russians would do this. And it was, when I saw it, I said, this is not a modern warfare operation. They use a modern warfare system. This is an actual old school Soviet Union style intelligence operation. They are going to either blackmail somebody or they are going to break somebody. And the week before the Democratic National Convention, I had been lobbying NBC to go on air to say that WikiLeaks was their laundromat. They had been releasing everything. The WikiLeaks gives it an air of respectability, then releases it. But that their intent was going to be to destroy the Democratic Party in the run-up to this election. NBC, we went back and forth a little bit, but on the morning of the Democratic National Convention, I was called and told, get up to Independence Hall, which is where we were, and go ahead and say what it was you were going to say. So, interesting, fun story, I'll make it very short. So Joy Reid is sitting there. I had never worked with Joy Reid, and I go up, and all she knows is that I'm coming to say something. So they put my mic me up, I sit down, and she goes on air, Malcolm, I hear you have something you'd like to say. I mean, she's looking at me sideways, like, who the hell are you and why are you here? And I said, yes. It appears that this operation, what you are seeing with WikiLeaks, is a broad-scaled cyber warfare operation being carried out against the United States by the Russian Federation in order to break the Democratic Party. I was the first person in media or analyst to come and say that on national television. And from that minute on, it has been nonstop, right up till this morning. Because what we saw was the United States being attacked fundamentally, at its core, by a nation that felt they could get away with it in order not just to break Hillary Clinton, it was to affect the election of Donald Trump. Now, a lot of people say, oh, that's crazy. I got it just yesterday. People saying, I don't see any evidence of that. In our field, we don't deal with a lot of evidence in the intelligence community. As a matter of fact, we don't deal with evidence at all. We deal with data. And when our data gets handed over to the FBI, then it becomes evidence. And so the reason I could write this book so fast, I started that book that very afternoon, July 25th. I finished it September 3rd, and it was published on September 23rd, 5 weeks before the election. Turns out, on the exact same time period, the CIA was writing an identical report and delivered it to President Obama on the exact same day that mine was published. Why? Because we think differently from journalists. Ned will tell you all about that. We really don't have to have 2 or 3 sources that we have to check every time. We steal our information, or we buy our information, or the information, as I like to say, it dropped from the sky, right? Whatever it is, but we can usually corroborate it because it's generally highly sourced information that's highly secret. And we can see between 2 or 3 data points and know all the steps that must take place to get between these 2 data points, right? It's like if an airplane takes off from Philadelphia and we see it on a satellite and it's miraculously in St. Louis and we see that on a satellite, well, I know about 5,000 steps took place between that, right? Left the hangar, refueled, got the crew, they got a coffee at Starbucks. We know all of that must occur. So with this hacking, we not only saw that the DNC was hacked, but it was a broad operation to hack your mindset about who was the preferred candidate in this election. And I'd be glad to hear from anybody who doesn't believe that. Because we in the U.S. intelligence community, we don't have any reason to lie to you. And the people that generally oppose me, the protesters that come up every once in a while, they'll believe every word in my 500-word book, a 500-page book about defeating ISIS. Every word. if I say something about terrorists, then when I talk about this, they go, I don't see any evidence of it, I won't believe you. Right? So this is just a fundamental existential threat to our democracy, to our nation, as a terrorist attack on 9/11.
Great. Gerald?
Well, I guess that it was more than just trying to do in the DNC, as you've explained. I guess the question is how did it manifest itself on the ground? I was speaking to, backing up what you just said, I spoke to our Secretary of State, Allison Grimes, and she tells me that to a person, in terms of the Secretaries of States across the United States,
Right.
that they are convinced and know that these things took place, to back up what you said.
Right.
But how do they manifest themselves on the ground? Understand the elections are conducted by states, not by the federal government.
Right.
What effect has that had in terms of keeping it from being worse than what it could be?
Well, I think it was going to be worse. And as a matter of fact, if it wasn't for, and I always make this joke, I cannot wait to see the movie, right?
Yeah.
Leonardo DiCaprio as John Brennan, director of the CIA, running around Washington, D.C., literally warning everyone that the nation is under attack. And on 4 August, he called the head of the Russian intelligence, the head of FSB, and said, we know what you're doing, we see your operation, you are to cease and desist this right now. They didn't. And what's even worse is, he was ordered by President Obama to go to the Gang of Eight, the top leaders in the House and the Senate, and brief them individually on what was going on. And the Republican leadership, with unfortunately Mitch McConnell, who's from here, refused to buy into it. He said he would not sign any statement that would point Russia out as the culprit. And fortunately, President Obama also made an address to the nation and notified Vladimir Putin himself using the war phone, the red phone, and said, we are aware of what you're doing, you will stop what you're doing, and if there is any action on election day, which is hacking the vote, then we will take strong and forceful action. The Russians did not hack on the election day as far as we can tell. But 28 states were probed. And I got into a fight with the head of the National Association of Secretaries of State when she said, she was, I guess, Secretary of State of Florida, when she said there is no evidence that any state was hacked. And I was like, okay, the Department of Homeland Security is saying this. Fortunately, nothing happened on the ground. But what does that matter? When I can change the mind, we learned just this morning, 87 million people were unknowingly brought in by Cambridge Analytics and had materials broadcast that were crafted down to the individual in order to stoke a specific emotion in you, the individual, then you got hacked. And whether you believed it or didn't believe it, you were influenced one way or the other.
Ned, you wrote a piece in the Washington Post recently that reflected your disagreement with the Trump policy in large part in response to, I think, we would say, the background that has brought us to the plot that hacked America. Talk a little bit about that. One, what led you to have to give up a career, a lifetime of service to your country? What was it that caused you to step down and write the piece that a lot of criticism and brought a lot of insight about the relationship between the Trump administration and the CIA? Not the first time those two branches have disagreed, but
not
enough
the last
for you
time.
to,
Yeah, so I, as you said, I was a career analyst at CIA. I joined shortly after I graduated from my undergraduate in 2006. I took a number of posts at the CIA. I spent most of my time in the agency's counterterrorism center doing and looking at things that Malcolm also has extensive experience with. And for the last 3 years of my service to the CIA, I was seconded. I was seconded down to the White House, where I worked on the National Security Council. So I had a pretty unique vantage point to the 2016 campaign from essentially the center of the political universe. And I didn't see anything I ever had expected to see from that perch. I saw a Republican nominee casually dismiss the high confidence findings of the U.S. intelligence community that Russia had been behind this hack and release of information. I saw the then president-elect on Twitter compare the FBI and our law enforcement and intelligence to Nazis, apparently not knowing of the role of our national security apparatus in taking on that threat in World War II. And then as president, on his first full day in office, I watched as he went to Langley, Virginia, to the site of CIA headquarters. And he stood in front of a wall called the Memorial Wall that has stars etched for each CIA officer who had fallen in the line of duty. It was 117 at that time. And he literally stood in front of that wall, obscuring the view to some of those stars, as he talked about the size of his crowd the day before at his inauguration, as he casually joked about stealing Iraq's oil, as he made political commentary before a group of intelligence officials who had spent their lives being nonpartisan, being apolitical, and really championing that. And so that obviously gave me tremendous pause. And then, this has been perhaps long since forgotten, just a few days after that, Steve Bannon, the president's former senior advisor, was appointed to the National Security Council, a body on which I had served on until just days before. So for me, that was really the last straw. I couldn't, in good conscience, go back and serve a president who had absolutely no regard for the type of intelligence products that I would be producing, a president who had no use for an intelligence community because he was ruled not by pragmatism, not by intelligence inputs, but by ideology and orthodoxy. And so I made the difficult decision to at least take a step back. I know there are a lot of people who were in similar shoes to mine, and we want to go back into government service as soon as the time is right. But made the calculation that now is not the right time to continue that, and hopefully it will be again sooner rather than later.
Now, you were criticized because you had made a contribution to Hillary Clinton, and that some said that this was a partisan. Your resignation was in part because you supported Hillary Clinton. So help us tease out, and both of you can weigh in on this, because we seem to have found ourselves in a position where if you're on Fox News, or if you're on MSNBC, depending on what the information is, we can't resolve what information. You know, Malcolm talked about not being a journalist, being able to look at data and draw conclusions. And I assume the same thing from you. You guys are separate from the rest of us. But now help us to resolve this conflict of where we are as Americans going forward. Because reading Malcolm's book and reading your piece and hearing others, I'd say that we've got to find a way to come to grips with it. If we've had a 9/11 event and we can't decide on whether this event happens, it seems to me that's a serious breach of confidence here.
So I'll start. Look, I think you raised the 9/11 analogy a couple times, and I think it's a good one because it does display these stark contrasts. I think the differences we've seen in the response to 9/11 and what we have, or in some cases have not seen, to what we saw in 2016 and beyond, were because of a couple factors. One, there was no violent attack. There was not a plane flying into a building. No one died. But it was still an attack on our democracy. But two, and I think this is more important, and Malcolm alluded to this before, is that there have been some protagonists in this whole affair who have consistently put partisanship, who have consistently put party over country. One of the earliest examples of that is when my colleagues in the Obama administration went up to Capitol Hill in late August of 2016, convened the leadership of the House and the Senate, and laid out in very clear detail, this is what we have seen, this is what Moscow is doing, this is why it's such a threat, and this is why we need to present a united front to the American people. This can't be just the Obama administration, a Democratic administration, coming out and warning of this. We need to present a bipartisan, united appeal to the American people. Well, as Malcolm said, that was quickly shot down, and quickly shot down by one lawmaker in particular, Senator McConnell. And that was just a part in a pattern of lawmakers getting behind, shying away from the facts, and casting their lot with a party and with a president who didn't want to hear those facts because, well, there are a bunch of different theories. Some people believe he thinks that it delegitimizes his electoral victory to know that the Russians had a hand. Obviously, there may be other more sinister motives about what he and his campaign may have been up to during that time period. But we have not seen a large part of this country put aside its partisanship in order to take this on. And to your question about the criticism I've received, look, we've heard a term over the past year or so quite a bit, and that's the deep state. The administration has consistently attacked the sinister deep state that is holding Trump back, that is obstructing, that's leaking. And what the deep state really is tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of dedicated men and women who have made the ultimate choice to serve their country, whether it's in uniform, whether it's in the intelligence community, whether it's in law enforcement community. People like me, like my former colleagues, who certainly have their own personal views. They're Democrats, they're Republicans. I frankly had no idea at CIA whether my colleagues were Democrats or Republicans because we didn't talk about it. We would put aside our own personal beliefs, knowing that we were there to serve our country and serve whichever commander-in-chief was in office. I started under President George W. Bush. I served proudly under him. I served proudly under Barack Obama, for whom I worked in the White House the last few years. But my own personal beliefs never stood in the way of what I was asked to do, what I had to do, and I think you will find the same for just about everyone else in public service.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And the phrase deep state, by the way, that's a conspiracy theorist term. All right, it is deeply, deeply offensive to me. As you alluded to earlier, my family has served in the armed forces, father and son, every war since 1864. My great-great-grandfather and his brother joined the 111th U.S. Colored Troops. His father, his son, my grandfather in World War I, my granduncle in World War I, my father in World War II, his father in World War II, Korea, Vietnam, right up to my niece who was in combat last year off of Yemen. We're what people are calling the deep state. The people who come to work and serve tirelessly to ensure that you get your checks, who's to defend the nation, who make sure that your water isn't polluted. This has been co-opted by this partisan cabal, because that's the only word I can use that accurately describes this, in order to make you feel less sure about who runs you. And that's offensive. It's offensive to me. My family has 123 combined years of military service. And to say that we're part of some broad conspiracy that's keeping Donald Trump out of office or delegitimizing him. Only Donald Trump can delegitimize Donald Trump, right? I mean, he opens his mouth, point made. And one other thing, and I want to comment about your remark about visiting the CIA. I've been seconded to other agencies. I'm not allowed to say whether I've ever worked over there in Langley, but I have been to the Memorial Wall. My wife and I have been to the Memorial Wall. I have 3 friends on that wall. And when we went there, it was a hallowed, a deeply humbling experience, right? It was the first time my wife ever saw me really cry, you know? And to get there, when you come from the briefing building, you have to walk past the statue of Nathan Hale as he's about to be hung, right? And the people who come into that agency and other agencies every day, they walk past their statues, or like at NSA, where I have other friends who are on their memorial wall, without thinking whether they're going to help you or keep you safe every day. And for Donald Trump to walk into that place the day afterwards and joke in that hall, it's a tiny little hall. And he bought a cheering section, and we know, because none of the CIA officers in front were cheering. It was the people up past the security gates in the T hallway who were shouting and screaming. There's not a person in that agency who would defile that hallway with that. So, fast forward to me running into Kellyanne Conway. I go to Kellyanne Conway in the green room. I got her trapped. She's getting her makeup on. So they're like, oh, don't interrupt her. I was like, oh, no. So I go and I go, Kellyanne, we need to have a little talk. Because my manager worked at CNN with her. And I said, your boss is equating people in the intelligence community to the Nazis, is telling them that they are disgusting, despicable, and trying to break him down. and I gave her that little speech that I just gave you a minute ago about Nathan Hale. And she says to me, Malcolm, you're absolutely right. We won't be saying any of these things anymore. 3, 2, 1. She walks on camera out of that room to face the nation and insults the intelligence community in her first sentence. I mean, we have people here who are not here for the service of this nation. I'm sorry. Pathological lying is a job resume plus in this White House. What did the Washington Post counted? Over 2,500 quantifiable lies. We do not work in the world of lies. We work in the world of empirical ground truth. If I tell you there are 25 Syrian tanks coming towards a special operations organization and that they're speaking Russian, you will believe me. Otherwise, someone will die. If I tell you that the Russians have hacked our systems, all right, and are using it in a political warfare operation, why would I make that up? We don't. Because the next thing that will happen is an airplane will fly into a building and 3,000 people get killed. And you go, oh, I can't believe it.
Oh, okay,
Gerald,
okay.
and we're going to turn it to, after your question,
Okay,
we would like for you
17,
to
I
get
believe
ready
it's-
for your questions.
Okay, I think it's 17 intelligence agencies said it was the Russians.
Right.
The fingerprints are everywhere.
Sure.
Okay, I get it. It's an attack on democracy in this country. But among all those dots, what would lead you to a conclusion or not lead you to a conclusion, given what you've said already and what we know, that President Trump has an interest in linking with the Russians on this particular subject matter?
You know, this investigation is not just a regular investigation. It is it started as a national counterintelligence investigation. If he or I had ever, at any point in our careers, had any contact with a foreign intelligence agency, the first thing they would do is they'd pull our clearances, they'd run us into a room, and they would be giving us lifestyle polygraphs day and night and checking our finances up, down, and backwards. That's what would happen to any person who had that contact. This investigation started with a FISA warrant, a Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act warrant. When someone lobbies for a FISA warrant against you, they are saying you are either one of two things. You are a foreign spy's asset who is willingly or unwillingly working with them, or you are a member of ISIS or Al-Qaeda or some other terrorist group. And we need to, one, take away your rights. When a FISA warrant's drawn on you, you lose your constitutional rights. You are essentially a foreign intelligence agent. And then we turn the entire U.S. intelligence community onto you. This is how this investigation started. They had foreign intelligence that said that American citizens in the Trump campaign were in contact and continuous communication with Russian intelligence officers. And that just led to everything that we're seeing now. Was Donald Trump in communication? We don't know, because there is an investigation going on. And we're talking the President of the United States. But another thing, his behaviors indicate that he is hiding something. I'm not saying this because I'm a partisan. I was a Republican, by the way, most of my life. Okay? I'm saying this because if it had been any one of us in the intelligence community, the hall across from me, we had a guy sell $1 billion program to the Russians for $36,000. And the first thing he did was he tried to hide it when they started asking him questions. The President of the United States does not get special treatment when it comes to investigations. And we're seeing that evidence pile up now. The things we're hearing in the news media, Mueller has had for 5, 6, 8 months.
Let's go to the floor now for questions. Thank you very much. Let's go right over here. If you could just give us your name, and here's the format we want to do. If we can have the questions to be short, and if we can get the answers to be short, we will get a lot of questions and answers. So there we go. You first,
Right.
sir.
Is this on?
Yes.
Okay. Very interesting talk. And I'll try to frame this real briefly. As an American who's unabashedly on the left, one of our critiques of this whole thing is that, you know, since the demise of the Soviet Union and what has come after that, with the rise of Putin and the, for many of us feel to be the criminal gang of capitalists he represents. And then we see in the United States the rise of Donald Trump, who pretty much represents the same thing. Do you think that a lot of this has to do with those guys colluding as global capitalists with no commitment to the nation state?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Okay.
Well, I think there are two possibilities here. One is the possibility of formal collusion, formal conspiracy, the two being in cahoots, whether it's the two of them personally, whether it's the two of them through a cutout, whether it's the two of them through their advisors. And obviously, Mueller's campaign investigation is predicated on getting to the bottom of that question. But there's a separate issue that doesn't necessarily require collusion that I think we have seen for sure. And that is that Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin have very similar worldviews, and worldviews that actually complement one another. You go back and you read what the intelligence community has said about the motivation behind the Russian attack. It wasn't just to denigrate Hillary Clinton. It wasn't just to get Donald Trump elected. It was to create instability. It was to create social strife. It was to weaken the United States from the inside. And whether Donald Trump knows that or not, he has pursued policies that has done that. He has done that on the world stage, and he has done that here at home. Look what he's doing in Syria, withdrawing from Syria while Iran and Russia literally meet to decide Syria's future. Look at what he's doing with our trade alliances, whether it's TPP, whether it's potentially tearing up NAFTA, allowing other countries, including Russia and China, to fill the void. Look at what he's doing across the board, creating vacuums that then Vladimir Putin can take advantage of. And his rhetoric vis-a-vis NATO is a case in point of that. And Vladimir Putin is reveling in that. But here at home too, part of the Russian campaign was to co-opt groups like Black Lives Matter, LGBT rights groups, to pit Americans against one another. And you just have to look at what happened in the aftermath of Charlottesville to see how this administration, in its ineptitude, in its corruption, in its warped and distorted worldview, has carried on that work. And so those two missions are very complementary, even if there isn't that formal collusion that's going on.
It's funny you should ask that question, because I have the sequel to Plot to Hack America. It's called The Plot to Destroy Democracy. And it lays out precisely how these two ideologies, these two groups, Putin and Trump, have identical ideologies. And there's a nexus for where Trump's worldview came from. A lot of people seem to think, over time, he just wants money. Well, yeah, he's been very avaricious. We all know that. But in 2013 at the Miss Universe pageant, he had a dinner with the top 12 richest men in the world, technically. They were all Russian oligarchs, including Vladimir Putin's personal representative. They all had personal wealth between $1 and $20 billion. For 2 hours, without interruption, they lectured him on their worldview. When he came out of that meeting, his worldview was identical to the Kremlin's. So when he started his campaign and we started hearing him talk about, getting rid of NATO, breaking up the European Union, being anti-globalization, America created globalism in World War II. When we started dropping cars and spam and all sorts of things around the world, at the end of the war, everyone wanted what we had, right? And so for an American president to be anti-globalization is insane. It would be like saying we want to get rid of the remainder of all production in the United States except for oil and coal, which, no one's buying coal. It's just as simple as that. But Donald Trump obviously at some point was co-opted by the Russians, and I think it all comes down to that 2-hour meeting at Nobu. Now the question is, what else did they offer him in there? You have men who are worth maybe $250 billion in one room, all right, when you consider Putin, at the same time, and Donald Trump is desperate for their money. And so he comes out speaking that party line. That being said, Vladimir Putin has his own strategy as well. what you described, which was nation states and leaders who are subservient to global money flow at an elite level and not their nation states, I actually term the axis of autocracies. This country is practically the last of the nations between Russia and Europe. Europe, by the way, is in serious trouble. Serious trouble. They have built right-wing, conservative, neo-Nazi supporting groups in Europe that far eclipse a lot of what we see now. The United States, we're the last as part of this plan, so to speak. They literally have, you know, the alt-right in the United States when they had Charlottesville, that was their coming out party. Europe has parties like that in every nation, and now they're starting to take power.
This question over here. Yes.
Yeah. Thanks, Ned, for organizing this, and thanks for coming to Louisville to present. My question is a little different.
Mike, the mic.
There you go.
I just returned from Argentina and Chile, two countries that have a long and sordid history with election interference that has cost thousands of lives down there. So I think it's naive for us to think that the Russians are the only people out there interfering with elections, even today. That was done by the United States in South America. What are we doing today in our intelligence community to interfere with foreign elections in other countries like Russia?
It's a good question. I don't think that, I'll answer first, Ned, if you don't want. Please. You know, the way people used to think, the way we put Mossadegh in power in 1952, that was old school intelligence operations where you would literally just buy the election, right? That doesn't work that way anymore. In the modern world, certainly since the church hearings in the 1970s, it became very clear what agencies like the CIA and other agencies that were tasked out to do that were doing. And they established a series of laws that stopped all of that type of direct operation. But what the Soviet Union used to do, this pre-Russian Federation, was they would go out and they would buy printing presses. They would buy newspapers. They would do thousands upon thousands of articles and intend to influence the mindset of the population. We used to do that also. Look in Vietnam and Cambodia, places like that. That was the old days. Okay? We have long since stopped that. Our influence was the soft power of the United States, going out and possibly promising aid, promising monies. All right, we really got out of the buying elections system. Russia has turned that on its head. They've taken that 73-year Soviet system of not just influencing elections, but trying to change regimes. But they figured out that the power of the electron, moving it with cyber warfare, you could get away with it. You could literally harvest and change the mindset of an entire nation state. And they started this in what was called Web War I in Estonia in 2003. And then after the Orange Revolution in Ukraine in 2004, information warfare, they have figured out, one, you're not actually invading anybody or killing anybody, but it is extremely influential in the world of cyberspace and social media. So nobody gets killed except for when they occasionally invade countries, right? Like Crimea.
Much of what we do today is not conducted by the CIA. It's not conducted by the U.S. intelligence community more broadly. It falls under the rubric of democracy promotion, and it's conducted by the Department of State in plain sight. And so this is the kind of activity that looks like funding an NGO, funding a human rights NGO in a country that is under autocratic rule, providing communications equipment, cell phones, calling cards to dissidents in various parts of the world, not to overthrow a government, but to strengthen civil society around the world so that within those societies, those political elements that have been under repression in some cases for decades actually have an opportunity to become part of the political system. And if you look at what Vladimir Putin has been railing against us for, it's really apples and oranges. They attack our elections through hacks and releases of emails and other documents, and we provide money to democracy promotion NGOs in Russia. We stand up for American values like democracy and freedom of the press and freedom of religion and precepts on which this country was founded. So they're very different styles of of electoral interference. I would argue that today, as Malcolm was saying, we are no longer in that business, and what we do actually propagates the values that all of us cherish.
Yes.
So we're engaged in psychological warfare. How do we fix it? What's the solution to stop this, to break the cycle?
Well, I think you're seeing it right now, just in the last 2 weeks with the revelations about Cambridge Analytica and Facebook. Sunshine. If you're, you know, when I taught at the survival school where I used to teach people to resist interrogation, right? And they would say, oh my God, you know, we're going to be tortured, we're going to be beat up and all these things. You know, you've heard of Stockholm Syndrome, right? Mm-hmm. Stockholm Syndrome is an automated response, a defensive response to you being in a high-stress situation, and it is autonomous. You do not know that you are undergoing Stockholm Syndrome till you've been trained in what Stockholm Syndrome is. And once you've been trained in that, you cannot be susceptible to it. You are aware of it. You know what the warning signs are. You know how the person behaves. In fact, you can actually carry out a thing called reverse Stockholm Syndrome, where you get your captor to sympathize with you. The same thing with cyber warfare. If you are aware that your information is being misused and abused, and that the ads that are coming to you now say you should hate everything about America that you've always loved, right? That your government has always been, you know, against you, or that the CIA has done horrible things in the past. We all know these things, okay? But you're essentially saying, I mean, if they're calling everybody the deep state, then George Washington was the deep state, right? You have to be aware that there are people and systems focused on you and your mindset that may actually harness what you already believe and move it just that nth degree to the right or to the left that moves you from normal to crazy, okay? Alex Jones, by the way, is worshipped in Russia, all right, InfoWars, as the truth teller of what's happening in the United States. Well, that tells you right there what their normative view of what American information should be, which we all know is crazy.
I'd like to follow up with Allison's question because I think it points to what is, it seems to me, is a really significant vulnerability for America over the next 20 to 25 years. We know that the demographics of America are changing rapidly. And you can just see that in the districts, the discussion we're having about voting rights, gerrymandering, 2 suits before the Supreme Court. We can see that with the questions about the census, about people's identity. There are a lot of indications that we're having trouble with the face of America changing. And we know the history of America. And so I'd like for both of you to speak, and Ned, if you do this first, talk to me a little bit about how we as Americans are going to, in this information age, it seems like this is where the Russians have us. They had us in the Cold War. Well, one of the ways they could succeed on the national level, from our standpoint, international level, was they talked about race in America, the difficulties that we would have with segregation. They could turn Americans against each other. Seems like to me, going forward, they've got a smooth shot to really disrupt us into very small segments, people against each other. They've got Fox News, Fox and Friends. They've got a lot of possibilities for where they can create division, and we wouldn't know.
Well, just look what they're already doing. They're already engaged in this. And I think one of the places you can see it most clearly is on Twitter. With every social controversy that emerges, take the Parkland shooting, the school shooting in Florida, for example. One of the most consistent propagators of "I stand with the NRA," the hashtag on Twitter, are Russian bots. Russian
bots, and you want to explain that a little
Russian
bit.
bots, meaning automated Twitter accounts that are essentially controlled by a node in Russia, usually out of St. Petersburg, at a various troll farm, as they're called. So these are, they pretend to be American citizens, they pretend to be your next door neighbor, but their English is often broken, and they refer to each other as comrade in person. So and you take a look at all of our social controversies. Look at the NFL controversy over Take a Knee.
Right.
Same with the Russian bots. Hashtag Take a Knee was taken over by Russian bots. Not because they found it inappropriate that NFL players were kneeling during the national anthem, but because they recognized how socially divisive this issue was for us. And unfortunately, we have, coincidentally or not, a president who also takes on these very same issues, whether it's the NRA, whether it's Take a Knee, you name it. And the positions he has voiced are almost always in line with the positions you hear the Russians putting forward and you see the Russians putting forward on social media. And perhaps that's just a confluence of their worldviews, perhaps it's something else, but you're right that it is absolutely exacerbating the divisions within us. And I think the challenge here, as Malcolm was saying before, is having that literacy, having that media literacy when it comes to recognizing fake news, when it comes to recognizing that a story of some terrible disease Hillary Clinton might have, or the fact that the Pope has just endorsed Donald Trump, two prominent fake news stories that had a big impact on Facebook and social media and the internet during the 2016 campaign, recognizing those red flags, not sharing it, not absorbing it just because you hope it's true, but doing the same thing on social media, and recognizing that there are going to be voices out there that are very intentionally trying to tear us apart, and not embracing voices just because we might like the opinion they're putting forward, but recognizing the origins of that too.
Oh, you brought me to tears. In fact, Russia right now is the center of the global conservative universe, not the United States. They actually have, in Western Europe, you just had literally a neo-Nazi-based government take power in Austria. The Five-Star Movement, which was a radical fringe movement in Italy, has just become the largest political party in Italy. And Steve Bannon went over there to counsel them. The Brexit movement in Europe was pushed by the UKIP organization and the BNP parties, which have their basis in pro-fascist parties. All of these groups over there, including France's Front National of Marine Le Pen, all funded by Moscow. Back in the old Soviet Union days, they would fund these hard leftist groups and the American Communist Party. When the new Russia came out, they found themselves as culturally conservative. They were orthodox in the mindset of Tsar Nicholas I, where their actual state belief is orthodoxy, nationalism, and autocracy. That is Vladimir Putin's 3 points of how he is pushing that country. They are tightly associated now with the American evangelical movement. Since 2010, they run evangelical conferences in Russia that people, great American evangelicals go to every year. The National Rifle Association now has deep ties with Russian organizations over there. There are many conservatives here in this country, and I used to be conservative, still am to a certain extent, who believe that under Barack Obama, Vladimir Putin showed what a real conservative should be. And they started to admire him. The Russians were very aware of that. You have to remember something. When the KGB went out of business in 1989, all right, for 73 years, they had been trying to make inroads into Americans. And then when they found that the conservatives of the United States admired their leader, Vladimir Putin. By the way, KGB just changed their letters to FSB. Everybody went to work the next day. Nothing changed. They just got better systems and a boatload more money, right? And so what they did was they realized their natural allies were the American conservatives. And they've spent the last 10, 15 years co-opting conservative organizations in the United States, which is why many people, certainly in the alt-right, the American neo-Nazis, David Duke, Mark Heimbach, who organized Charlottesville, Richard Spencer, the American neo-Nazi party, all of them have apartments in Moscow. All of them go to Russia every year for the World Nationalist Conservative Movement Conference. We have here not an American, how can I put it, organization that is viewing race as a problem. They've managed to co-opt Europe, most of Europe, based on immigration, based on immigration against Africans, Muslims from Syria and Afghanistan, and like Vladimir Putin said to Marine Le Pen, you're a nation of colonies that is going to have colonies taking over your nation. And they believe that. The racism in Europe is insane with these parties now. There was a group called Pegida in Germany, which was a real neo-radical, anti-Muslim, anti-globalization, neo-Nazi movement, which now its political arm, AfD in Germany, is the second largest party in Germany. Literally running on Nazism and fascism in Europe, and they're winning. Our election and Charlottesville, we're the last as part of that strategy.
Question here from the floor. We only have a few more minutes, so if you've got still questions, we'll try to get 2 or 3 more and we'll wrap up before 1.
Two quick questions. Was there any evidence that the Russians tried at all to infiltrate the Republican National Committee or any Republican organizations in the last election?
Yes.
And my second question to answer both is what are they doing now to influence the next election?
Well, I can tell you yes, because Lindsey Graham came out and was the one who announced that the Republican National Committee had been probed. There's enough, let me tell you something, the systems that they're using to get into these servers these are government level systems, right? They're designed to get past security no matter what you put up. But their preference was stealing the information of the Democrats, weaponizing it, and using it to damage that party. I believe that there's an understanding out there that the Russians could out anybody. Tomorrow morning, Lindsey Graham, in his lifestyle, could be broadcast broad and wide if he is non-compliant. This is called compromat, right? Compromising information. The Russians are masters of this. They have blackmailed people left, right, up and down over the last 20 years using stolen information from people's own emails. Look, if they want to get into your systems, their version of NSA will find everything there is to know about you. And then they can use black propaganda and change it up to make it look like you're a child molester. So I think, that's what they have. What could be done in the next election? People power. They hate, by the way, they hate people power. They hate these, what they called the color revolutions, where people took to the streets and overthrew governments. They cannot, Vladimir Putin constantly complains about orange revolutions, Maidans, these color revolutions happening. He said that Trump should be on guard for an American Maidan, which was the big people power that swept out the pro-Moscow government, in the Ukraine. If he's terrified of that, well, I say let's make him sweat.
Any other questions? Yes, back here. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. I just have a quick question. As a proud member of both the intelligence community and the armed forces for the last 22 years, I think where I have the most trouble is the power of the misinformation that's out there. And so I'm curious to know, sorry, I have a really big mouth, I'll stand back here. I'm curious to know how you all see our way forward when we're not able to reach people with facts anymore. And that's where I find most distressing. Isn't necessarily the amount of information, but then when I'm able to come to you and be like, sir, I know with absolute certainty that this is what happens, and I can provide data that backs it up, but no longer are we controlled by facts. And so I'm curious, as you all see a way forward on how we can get to the American people and let them know, like, no, these are the facts, and then you can make your opinions based off this actual data, but not necessarily what gets the most likes on Facebook or Twitter or whatever you're reading.
Yeah.
We're, I think you've identified a problem. We're living in separate media ecosystems, and these ecosystems don't intersect at all. There is no overlap. between what you would see on Fox News and what you see in the real world. And so I think we have to identify, first have to recognize that. We first have to recognize that what we are subscribing to most of the time is what we want to hear. And we have to, people on the left, people on the right, need to open ourselves up to what is all around us, and not just what is within our own ecosystem. You know, I watch, when I watch cable news, it's mostly MSNBC, but I make a concerted effort, whether it's on Twitter, whether it's in papers I read, and sites that I browse online, to make sure I see and hear what people are reading on FoxNews.com or on the Drudge Report, or on other sites where you're likely to get a different perspective. And I think you have to do that, but then you also have to couple it with that same bit of media literacy that we were talking about before, recognizing red flags. If something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. If something is, if an outlet is consistently within your worldview and only tells you what you want to hear, and you leave the site or the web page feeling totally satisfied, there's probably something wrong there too. So it's about injecting diversity into what we read, what we look at on a daily basis, but then also recognizing the implicit biases and the motivations behind various newspapers. Look, I trust the New York Times, but they don't always get it right. I trust the Washington Post, but they don't always get it right. I love the Wall Street Journal, but same goes with them. And so I think we just need to be cognizant of that broader environment.
You're an intel officer, and that's great, because you know what it's like to deal with ground truth, right? Hardcore empirical truth, right? You're running drones, you're looking at 50 guys with rifles, right? You go, hey, I got 50 guys with rifles. I'm counting them with my pen. You can even take imagery of that and transmit that imagery back to higher headquarters. But, and you do your strike, you kill 50 guys, special forces go on the ground, they get 50 rifles, and the next morning, you're finding out the BBC is reporting you struck a wedding, which happens because we have destroyed some weddings because people were not carrying out the game right. They were not actually verifying what they were seeing. If I come out with 50 rifles, it ain't a wedding, right? 50 guys and no women. It's not a wedding. So, on the other hand, you have to deal with misinformation. But we use our information organizations, our systems, to give us what's ground truth. I work for MSNBC. I do not lie when I'm on television. When I give my opinion, it is based on my broad experience, and I give projections based on information which is commonly available to everyone else that's watching. That book, Plot to Hack America, it's all unclassified, just what I saw, and it spelled this. And what we have now is there are people who are so partisan, they do not care about reality. Now, Ned made the comment that you should go watch Fox News or you should read Breitbart. I had 50 death threats last year on Breitbart's comment section alone, because I had made an empirical statement of analysis that Trump Tower Istanbul was pulling its name off of the tower because of terrorism threats. And my comment was, well, that would be my nominee for the first ISIS suicide bombing of a Trump property worldwide. They had already carried out numerous suicide bombings around that building in that city. The next morning, I get this. I swear to you, 23 right-wing organizations wrote and broadcast, MSNBC terrorism analyst tells ISIS to attack Trump Tower. No, if you Google my name, it's one of the first things that will come up. And I got 50 death threats against my family in a 24-hour period. My wife, every morning, still checks Breitbart to see what kind of craziness that they have going on there. That is not news. That is a propaganda warfare system which is working against the reality that you live in, right? You have to be able to discern between right and wrong, what existed before as a norm, and what people are making up in order to hijack your opinion.
Senator Neal?
Wow. I tell you, You know, as you were talking, in fact, the whole time I was thinking about how we're fed through the news system that we have now, cable and so forth. It looks like no matter what you do, it cuts both ways. It keeps feeding both sides of these preconceived notions you have. And I'm not clear on what's the strategy. I hear generally, you know, sunshine, that helps, discerning, educating and discerning between the information that you're receiving. But it doesn't seem like a strategy in terms of to counter that.
Can I just make one point? There aren't two sides. There's reality and there's crazy. No, really. I'm sorry. I have to deal with this every day. Okay? What is real is real. There is a special counsel who is investigating the president, and he is a subject of a national counterintelligence investigation. By coming and saying he's not a target, that does not, the Gotti family was the subject of an investigation for 10 years, and then they put them all in prison when they became targets.
Except for one thing.
What's that?
In Frankfurt, all the time, I'm dealing with individuals, I say, I'm going to take them by the hand, and I'm going to take them all the way to the conclusion. And I can take them to 50 steps, and 51 is the answer, then they revert back to their original belief. So it gets into your belief system as well. So it can be real to you, but they can reject it, deny it, because it does not feed who they think they are in relationship to reality.
Just 5 days ago, I was on the Jersey Turnpike. I stop into a rest area. I get a coffee. There's TV screens in this rest area. As I'm standing, I'm looking at the TV screen. There's a story from CNN saying that the special counsel was looking into the Trump campaign. There's an older white gentleman sitting there, and I go, man, that's interesting. He goes, it's fake news. Just out in the open. And he goes, it's from the New York Times, it's fake news. Done. I've dealt with members of ISIS, I've dealt with members of Al Qaeda. Once you are in a position where your opinion is irretractable, you cannot talk them out of that. It will take a shock to the system. Someone's going to have to be brought up on, espionage charges, and they probably still won't believe it. This story, Donald Trump understands this. This is a guy who used to do WWE wrestling, by the way. He knows the base voter, and he knows the pantomime of wrestling. And he knows that people who know wrestling's not real, they actually throw punches, they just pull them at the end. So everything's real right up to the moment you get hit. And if he can convince you that this is all a conspiracy from he keeps saying liberal, Democrat, FBI, there's a different FBI than I know, and that all of these people who are registered Republicans their entire lives are all really secretly Democrats and Hillary voters, there will be no way to defeat that partisanship.
Well, I'd hoped that we were going to end on a more hopeful note.
There's no way.
But apparently, I was wrong.
We got work to do.
But I do want to say this, that as we bring this forum to a close, I'd like to thank our two wonderful guests for sharing some really thought-provoking ideas with us. I think there's no question. No question that we have been challenged in our belief systems. Whether you're on the left or the right, actually it doesn't actually matter. What we're talking about today is the future of our country, which is what brings us all here together. I'd like to conclude by thanking our partner, the Kentucky Authors Forum, Mary Moss Greenbaum and Melissa. Thank you so much for partnering with us in the College of Business. We have Carmichael's, who still has books available for sale over here to our right, and we ask you if you would if you have not already purchased one, I think our author has agreed to sign a few more. And we also have tickets tonight when Ned is going to interview Malcolm, and I think we have some special tickets for $5 for members of the University of Louisville student community, and so you're still encouraged to join them. If you've not been to an author's forum, it's a wonderful forum, and oftentimes the university is able to partner with them. We've had Malcolm Gladwell, we recently had Joe Stiglitz, the Pulitzer Prize winner, just wonderful people that the university otherwise wouldn't be able to get, but with the Authors Forum, we can partner and bring them to the community that we love. And so with that, I'd like to thank again My co-host, Senator Gerald Neal, who is an outstanding Kentuckian, a member of our faculty here at the University of Louisville. I'd like to thank Malcolm Nance, who everybody just, in my family, when he comes on, we go right to the television.
That's right.
Delighted to meet a new member of my community, Ned Price. Thank him for his service to our country. Looking forward to you returning to the service of our country, and look forward to seeing you tonight. And thank you all for coming. Thank you. Sure.